Asylum Inc. presents Phobic. The pitted room. The thing about holes is that they hunger. They gape with an expectancy that transcends mere absence, becoming presence through their very negation of substance. Marla Finch understood this truth in the marrow of her bones, in the wet hollows of her skull where reason had once nested like a contented bird before the pecking began. She had arrived at St. Dymphna's infirmary in the pewter hours before dawn, her Toyota Camry still warm from the 6-hour drive south from the Vermont hills, where her grandmother's farmhouse squatted like a tumor against the tree line. The duty nurse found her in the parking lot, barefoot on the frost-slicked asphalt, palms turned skyward in supplication or surrender. Blood had dried to rust-colored scales across her cheeks, where she had clawed at her own flesh, and her eyes, those pale grey eyes that had once been called pretty, remained clamped shut with the determination of a child refusing medicine.
"Don't let me see,"
she whispered when they tried to coax her lids apart.
"Please. They're watching through everything now."
The inheritance had come unexpected, as such things do when death reaches out with its bureaucratic fingers to rearrange the living. Grandmother Finch, whom Marla had known only through Christmas cards signed in spidery script and the occasional phone call that crackled with ancient telephone wiring, had bequeathed her the farmhouse and its 43 acres of maple and birch. It seemed a blessing then, this sudden windfall of property and possibility, an escape from her cramped Boston apartment where the rent devoured her teacher's salary like some financial parasite. The house revealed itself to her on a September afternoon when the leaves had begun their slow burn toward winter. It was larger than she had expected, a rambling Victorian structure whose gingerbread trim had gone grey with weather and neglect. The wraparound porch sagged under the weight of seasons, and morning glory vines had colonized the southern wall with their heart-shaped leaves and trumpet flowers, now brown and brittle as ancient skin. Inside, the air held the mineral scent of age, dust and mouse droppings, and the sweet decay of wood slowly returning to earth. Her grandmother's belongings populated every room like the artifacts of some private museum. Mason jars filled with herbs whose names she could not pronounce, ceramic dishes glazed with hairline cracks, antimacassars yellow with time draped over furniture that had witnessed the passage of decades. But it was in the bathroom that she first noticed them. The tiles were vintage, small hexagonal pieces in a faded mint green that might have been fashionable when Eisenhower was president. Age had not been kind. Several had loosened from their moorings, leaving dark spaces where the adhesive had failed. But these gaps were not random. They formed patterns, clusters of 6 or 7 holes that repeated across the wall like some deliberate design, like the compound eyes of insects magnified to monstrous proportions. Marla found herself staring at these formations during her evening bath, the way one might stare at clouds seeking familiar shapes. The holes seemed to pulse in her peripheral vision, expanding and contracting with the rhythm of her own breathing. She told herself it was the steam, the way heat could make surfaces appear to move, but the explanation felt thin as tissue paper, inadequate to contain the growing certainty that something was terribly wrong. Sleep became elusive. She would lie in the ancient 4-poster bed that had been her grandmother's, listening to the house settle around her with its vocabulary of creaks and sighs. But always her mind would return to those tiles, to the perfect darkness that filled each missing space. Were they growing? The question followed her into dreams, where walls breathed and surfaces rippled like water, disturbed by unseen swimmers. By the 3rd week, she had begun to notice them everywhere. The wood floors revealed knotholes arranged in suspicious symmetries. The wallpaper in the dining room, already peeling at the seams, had developed a pattern of small tears that clustered like lesions across faded roses. Even the fruit in her grandmother's garden, apples and pears left to rot on the branch, showed evidence of the invasion, their skins pocked with perfect circular wounds where wasps or birds had fed. The basement was worst of all. She discovered it by accident, pulling linens from a cupboard near the kitchen
when her fingers found the latch hidden behind stacked towels. The door, painted the same cream color as the walls, had been invisible until that moment. It opened onto a narrow staircase that descended into darkness, thick as velvet. The space below was smaller than the house's footprint suggested, a crawl space, really, with a dirt floor and stone walls that wept moisture despite the autumn drought. Someone had strung a single bulb from the ceiling joists, its yellow light revealing what her grandmother had hidden. The walls were alive.
Not with any conventional sense of life, but with a presence that made her skin crawl and her breath catch in her throat. Holes covered every surface, thousands upon thousands of them, each no larger than a pencil eraser, arranged in spiraling galaxies and concentric circles that hurt to look at directly. They were too perfect, too deliberately placed to be the work of insects or decay. They had been carved, she realized, cut into the stone, with tools whose purpose she could not fathom. And they were watching. This knowledge came to her not through sight, but through some deeper sense, the way prey animals know when predators move through tall grass. Each hole was an eye, each cluster a compound organ of perception that tracked her movement through the basement with patient malevolence. She backed toward the stairs, her heels scraping against the dirt floor, but could not escape the feeling that she was being catalogued, memorized, claimed. That night, she began the filling. It started reasonably enough, a tube of cork from the hardware store to seal the gaps in the bathroom tiles. But as she worked, smoothing the white compound into each dark space, she realized the futility of her task. For every hole she filled, two more seemed to appear. The pattern was spreading, she understood now, colonizing surfaces the way mold colonizes bread, converting solid matter into absence with inexorable purpose. She tried everything. Candle wax dripped into the wood floors, cotton balls jammed into electrical outlets, towels stuffed into heating vents. Sleep became impossible. She would wake to find new holes in the walls beside her bed, their edges sharp as if they had been punched from within by something trying to escape. Or enter. The mirror in her bedroom vanity began to show her things she did not want to see. Her own reflection, familiar and comforting for 29 years, had become a landscape of potential invasion. Every pore was a doorway, every freckle a breach in her defenses. She could see them beginning to form beneath her skin. Small, dark spots that would soon open into passages for whatever intelligence moved through the house's hidden architecture. On the final night, she made her choice. The wire brush belonged to some long-ago project of her grandmother's, its steel bristles stiff with rust and paint. She found it in the basement, lying beside the wall where the holes were thickest, and understood that it had been waiting for her, that everything had been waiting for her, that she was both victim and instrument in some design too large for her sanity to encompass. She worked methodically, scrubbing at her face with the dedication of a penitent seeking absolution. The pain was clean and honest, so different from the creeping wrongness that had infected her perceptions. Blood ran warm down her neck and stained the collar of her nightgown, but with each stroke, she felt the potential holes closing, sealing themselves against invasion. When they found her 3 days later, the mailman had grown concerned about uncollected letters. She was curled in the basement corner, her face a mask of dried blood and raw flesh. The wire brush lay beside her, its bristles dark with evidence of her devotion. She had not moved from that spot since her collapse, existing in some twilight state between consciousness and catatonia, her eyes sealed shut against the sight of surfaces that might betray the invasion beginning beneath. The police photographers documented everything with clinical efficiency: the candle wax in the floorboards, the cotton stuffed in every available opening, the towels and rags and desperate attempts to make solid what insisted on being hollow. Their cameras captured the basement with its mysterious excavations, though in the harsh light of professional equipment, the holes appeared exactly as they were. Random damage from some long-ago infestation, unremarkable except for their number. But Marla knew better. Even now, 3 weeks into her residency at St. Dimpnus, she understood that the patterns persisted in dimensions the cameras could not capture. They lived in the spaces between perception and reality, in the gaps where certainty gave way to doubt. They were patient, these watchers in the walls, content to wait until the proper conditions aligned for their fuller manifestation. She kept her eyes closed, not from madness, but from wisdom. The world was full of holes, shower drains and keyboard keys, the hexagonal cells of honeycomb, the compound eyes of flies, the pores that opened across every human face like tiny screaming mouths. To see was to invite connection, to acknowledge the network that threaded through all surfaces, all barriers, all the comfortable illusions that separated inside from outside, self from other, sanity from the vast and hungry dark. Attending notes, Dr. Helena Mordaunt. Patient continues to refuse visual stimuli. Neurological scans reveal no abnormalities, though EEG patterns during sleep show unusual clustering in theta wave formations, almost like a rhythm, a cadence that seems to repeat every 47 seconds. Most curious. I have removed all textured surfaces from her room per protocol, yet she still reacts with distress to seemingly benign stimuli. The ventilation grate, now sealed, the pattern of rain against her window, curtains drawn, even the pores on my own hands during examination, gloves now mandatory. Of particular interest, patients' wounds are healing in a pattern I've not encountered in 20 years of practice. The scabs form small, perfect circles that seem to want to open. I've increased the bandage changes to twice daily, though the nursing staff has begun to request reassignment. They complain of dreams. I found myself in the basement of the old Finch property yesterday, ostensibly to gather evidence for her case file. The holes are exactly as she described, though photographs fail to capture their full arrangement. I understand now why she tried to fill them. Some absences demand occupation. Note: request immediate transfer of patient Finch to isolation wing. The holes have begun appearing in other patients' rooms. If you found yourself stirred, unsettled, or just a bit more wary of shadows, consider offering a like to feed the entity that powers these tales. And should you subscribe, you may yet survive to hear the next whisper from the void.